Housekeeping. We are in listen-only mode, so please make sure your mic is muted. If you're having any Wi-Fi issues, you may want to turn off your camera and any other programs you have running. In fact, your camera should be turned off as it is. Please make note of the chat feature in either the upper right-hand or lower right-hand of your screen. Please use the chat for communication, as we will not be taking questions by audio. Jim Kilinowski of Dewberry is monitoring the chat and will try to help you with technical matters. Please post to everyone when using the chat. We are offering 1 hour of continuing education credit for CFMs. To receive the credit, you must be logged in separately, answer all poll questions during the session, and provide your name and email at the end of the presentation. Poll questions should appear as a pop-up on but may appear in the chat box. If you're having issues answering the poll questions, please check the chat box and use the radio buttons to respond. A copy of the presentation will be emailed to all attendees. Survey link will be provided at the end of the presentation. We appreciate you completing the survey so that we may improve these webinars in the future. We are recording today's webinar and plan to post the video to georgiadfirm.com. With that, let's get started. Today we have a presentation about enhancing floodplain management with base level engineering. Our presenter is Jarrett Matley. Jarrett is a senior project manager based in Dewberry's Atlanta office with 18 years of experience supporting GIS and water resources projects. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jarrett.
All right, thank you, Emily, and thank you for everybody in attendance today. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll be talking about the base level engineering analysis that's being conducted for Georgia. And then looking for ways that we can tie that to floodplain management activities, local floodplain management activities. And we'll take a look at resources that are available, both Georgia's BLE homepage and dashboard, and looking through those and doing a pretty extensive walkthrough so that you are familiar with how to use and access those data sets. So at first it helps to have a better understanding of what base level engineering is. And it's basically a watershed-wide, cost-effective method for quickly getting accurate flood risk information. So we can take a very large-scale area, watershed area, assess the flood hazards for it holistically, and put that data in the hands of community officials to use for their floodplain management needs rather quickly. And then we can also use that for sort of future planning, basically looking to assess the validity and quality of your existing flood hazards and your effective FEMA products, and essentially using this analysis to help us plan future risk map revisions where we're looking to revise your regulatory products and update it with this better information. So all of our base level engineering is conducted off of the best available LiDAR data. We now have statewide coverage for LiDAR as of very recently in the last few months. That was kind of a hindrance to this project where we were kind of waiting on some of that data to be finalized as part of the USGS 3DEP program, but now it's all since come online and we're able to get started with just about all the areas that we currently have planned for BLE, and I'll go through that here shortly where we have the planned analysis. Now we have both 1D and 2D study areas. The 2D studying modeling methods are reserved for areas where we have more unconfined flows. And then the 1D, the traditional sort of modeling approach using the 1D methods is reserved where we have more of those confined flows and the floodplain isn't spilling out in every direction. Where we have this BLE analysis, we're conducting all the standard risk map study frequencies, including the 5-year, the 10-year, the 25-year, the 50, 100. There's the 100-year plus and minus, which is kind of like a upper and lower bounds realm of error version of interpretation of the 1%, kind of shows you that realm of error in the 100-year. And then we have a 500-year. We're also assessing future conditions and in a lot of these areas where we're doing this analysis, they're fairly rural. So we're looking using some EPA data sets to project out to 2050 and see if the urbanization is projected to increase significantly, enough to warrant a difference to conduct a 1% future, a base level 1% future analysis as part of our mapping and modeling. And then we've got a couple of additional, they're not modeled frequencies, but mapping interpretations, looking at some freeboard scenarios, seeing where water would go if you have just an additional foot, 2 feet or 3 feet above that base flood elevation, seeing the additional areas that could be impacted. Likewise, we are producing what we phrase flood risk products, which includes water surface depth and probability grids, which are going to be available, and we'll talk more about shortly. So the analysis that we're conducting, apologize, I hit the wrong key. The analysis that we're conducting fits the Zone A modeling requirements set by FEMA. It lives up to that Zone A standard. And the intention for that is that it can be directly loaded and incorporated into your regulatory mapping if the occasion occurs that we're able to do that in the future. But I will say that with the base level engineering methods that we're using, it actually is a little bit better than the traditional analysis. In the 2D in particular, we use a mesh for our analysis, and so you can see kind of the raw sort of unadjusted mesh here. Basically, every edge acts as sort of a cross section, if you will. In a traditional 1D model, you wouldn't have cross sections placed quite this close, so you have a lot more control points that are influencing the information, the results of the modeling. And then we adjust that grid based on break lines for roads, helping us better model the conditions backing up behind embankments, such as those roads, refining the grid where the stream channel is so that we have better accuracy around the stream channel where you're going to have that flooding. And then we can make bigger cells outside of that where we likely don't need as much accuracy, where the floodplain wouldn't be on high ground. And then we're also factoring in structures to some degree. We're using assumed widths to burn through the terrain to hydro and force our DEMs, allowing for some flow to go through the structures as would be the case for a culvert or bridge or so forth. So it in some ways it's a step above the traditional Zone A analysis. So this is showing the coverage of the BLE. It's quite extensively covering the southern half of the state. This is showing where we have it completed in dark green, and it's available on the base level engineering dashboard. In light green, that's where our engineering is complete, but we haven't gotten to the point of loading it for one reason or another to the BLE dashboard, but will be likely the next in line to be added to our site. And then very recently, this light blue kind of expanded, where we were waiting on a lot of LiDAR to come online for the eastern half of these blue areas. And that's all very recently come online, so we're able to get started with doing our analysis there. We hope to have all of this done within the next year or so, roughly. So by 2023, we should have complete coverage in these basins for Georgia's BLE. So why are we doing this? Well, so the very core reason, the biggest reason for doing this is to basically provide better flood information for the over 15,000 study miles of effective Zone A analysis that's based on old, outdated National Elevation Data Set, NED topography. And so you could see the difference between that older data set, that older NED data set over on the right, compared to when you have LiDAR. With NED, you have one ground elevation for a 30-foot cell, 30-foot square area. And then that cell elevation has a plus or minus 8 feet vertical accuracy. So you've got a big range and a lot of lack of detail in that. So you can't really see the definition of the stream channel, the roads going through the topography, the building pad, building footprints, a lot of detailed definition that you just can't see from this. But when you have LiDAR, especially now, in that same area, you could have even hundreds of elevation returns in that same sort of square area, and you get a better picture of the definition of the ground. And so basically, now the NED, at the time of many of the studies that are in the effective mapping, the NED was the best available at the time, and it was considered pretty decent. You know, it could be improved, but you know, it's not until now that we have this statewide LiDAR coverage that is just much more highly accurate to allow us to conduct this analysis more broadly, and the computing power to do so. And so the first primary reason is to get better flood hazard information for those areas that are based in that older topography. And the second reason is to quickly put better floodplain management tools in the hands of communities, getting those communities that had limited flood hazard information better quality data to work with more immediately. All right, so we'll turn over to our BLE homepage and dashboard. And I'm just going to skim through these slides because I'm going to do a demonstration for you here in a minute. So this is the Georgia Base Level Engineering homepage shown on the left. There's just a wealth of resources. I'd encourage you to jot down this address and visit it to see the regular updates that occur. But I'm going to go over to that page here shortly. We also have a BLE dashboard and report function where you can create a report that returns the you know, this good quality flood risk information. Then we have a base level engineering playbook that is intended to be a guide for community officials in using this BLE, kind of showing them how it can be used. So I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to move over to the web page, the base level engineering homepage, if you will, and I'm going to kind of do a bit of a demonstration. So we're going to leave the PowerPoint for a little while, and we'll come back to it later. So here on the page, what you initially see are 3 buttons at the top. The first is the BLE status viewer. So if I click on that, you get up-to-date status information for where our areas stand. Now this is showing where we have the data available in the dashboard, where the engineering is complete, but it's not posted to the dashboard. The areas we have in progress, which are in light blue on this. We have these dark blue areas shown as planned. Those are active, but only active as in as of like the last couple of weeks when we've received that final LiDAR data. So all of these areas are active. We also have an area up here in the northeast corner that will be a recipient of this BLE analysis, but they're actually the Hiwassee and upper Little Tennessee watersheds are actually going through full-fledged risk map revision. So they're not just getting the BLE analysis, it's getting incorporated into their regulatory products. And so they're at the very beginning of that workflow. And then we have the BLE dashboard, which I'm going to hop over and I'm going to come back to because there's a lot going on there. Then we have on the far right, we have our BLE playbook. And so it's just a PDF guidebook that's intended to explain how you can use those data sets, the BLE data sets for floodplain management, planning, development decisions, emergency management uses, and so forth. And it's organized into pretty informative sections. And then throughout, you get these if, and then sort of scenarios. And so I'll go down, that was just kind of explaining it there, but you get these if, then, and then scenarios that help guide you, hold your hand through how you can use this BLE data, particularly when you have effective firm data and this BLE information that's overlapping. And then what are some of the actions you can do? And we've kind of tailored those so that they follow every section so that we can hopefully help guide you to how you can use that BLE information for, say, open space and land, open space preservation projects and land use planning, or any number of activities that are through this. It's a lengthy document, but lots of really good information to help you in using the BLE data. And then you scroll down from the home page, and we just kind of have a high-level summary of what BLE is. We have a fact sheet that you can click on and answer some common questions that we've seen from BLE. And then below that, we have a story map that has lots of good educational information to help you with understanding BLE, educational videos helping to explain how we're doing our analysis, what BLE is, what kind of data sets are available, as well as walkthroughs through using our dashboard and reporting functionality, which I'm going to go through today. Lots of good information in there. And so with that, I'm going to go back up to the top, and we're going to go ahead and go into the BLE dashboard. Click on that. You get a brief disclaimer, and already you can see the data sets that are currently available within the dashboard. And when you scroll in, what you see by default is the 1% flood hazard results in blue from the BLE analysis, and then the 500-year 0.2% flood hazard results from the BLE analysis shown in orange. You also have these sort of masked out areas, grayed out areas. Those are corresponding with where you have effective Zone AE or detailed studies in your effective FEMA products. The idea there is that you wouldn't want to use the BLE information where you have effective detailed study information with published BFEs in your effective products. And so we're trying to help you, by preventing accidental use of this BLE information in those situations. And then you also have building footprints kind of spread throughout. We're using Microsoft Bing's building footprints, which we have national coverage, statewide coverage for, and using that to help facilitate our reporting functionality. And I'll come back to that here in a little bit. And then as you scroll around, zoom in and out, you have some dynamic functionality where things turn on and off. You can see that by zooming out, the building footprint points disappear. There's also an ability to turn off toggle layers on and off. And so over on the left, we've got a dynamic legend that updates. And as you play around with this dashboard, if you're not sure what something is, you can always come over here and scroll and see if you can find the symbology, and hopefully that'll better explain what you're seeing. Over on the right, we've got a series of little widget buttons, and the very top one is the base map gallery. So if you don't like the base map that we default to, you can change it to something that suits you better. I would think that the most common thing that people would be looking to change it to would be the imagery options for base map, so you can better see the structures and so forth that fall in the BLE study areas. You can also search for addresses or place names here with the little search pop out. And then we've got a expand or an overview window, which shows you the general area of where you are. So you can see that we're just outside of Thomasville, southeast of Thomasville, where we're looking currently. And you can kind of zoom out and see that we're well in the southern portion of the state. And then we have our, what I'll refer to as our table of contents. And this shows all the data sets that are available in our BLE viewer and dashboard. And what you can do is turn off layers using this little eyeball symbology. So if you wanted to see just the 500-year floodplain results, you could turn off the 100-year, and now you just have that 500-year floodplain that you can look at. If you wanted to see what the effective flood hazards look like, so we'll turn off the 500-year. We can turn on the effective flood hazards and take a look at those. Okay, let me zoom to a different area where we've got a little bit more effective coverage, and I'll explain that here shortly. So here we go. We've got effective zone A shown in red. So you can see the symbologies here, and then we've got our BLE analysis, 1% analysis in blue, and so you can see the considerable difference in those. Now we also have a change layer for the effective and BLE 1%. So you could look at them both separately there, but we have an effective to BLE change data set. So you could see that here, where we're highlighting the differences between those two data sets. So you could see in green where we have a reduction in the proposed flood hazard area based on the BLE analysis results. And then in red, you've got the increases, horizontal increases in the floodplain based on those BLE results. And so I mentioned this a little while ago. So you can see in our 2D study areas that there's a lot of increase with our 2D modeling methods. It's basically an analysis of the broader area. And so you get returns for flood information everywhere. And we realize that that's a considerable amount of information to contend with. Now, over in a traditional 1D area, it looks thinner, but we're doing some things to make sure that we're having a consistent level of analysis. For one thing, in our 1D study areas, we're carrying the analysis up to the 1 square mile drainage area. And in the 2D areas, we're doing a couple of things down there to differentiate our analysis. So I'm going to go back to turn on the BLE floodplain. I'm going to turn off the changes. And you've got all this flood hazard information. There is a, let's see if I can find it. BLE 1% floodplain potential moderate risk. And what that's doing is it's subdividing our BLE results so that you can see the hashing. There's a couple different options for the hashing and what those mean. But where you don't have the hashing, that's basically the 1% results up to the 1 square mile drainage area. So that's kind of comparable to what you're seeing over here in those traditional 1D study areas. And then beyond that, you're seeing areas that are subdivided where the drainage area is less than 1 square mile, or where your average depths of the flooding is less than a foot. And there's the prospect or potential maybe showing those as shaded zone X. That's kind of contingent on a number of factors being decided if a risk map project were actually initiated for these watersheds. But we're sort of preemptively trying to separate that information out to smooth out that consideration if a risk map project is initiated in this watershed. Okay, so then we also have a few other data sets. I'm going to turn off the moderate risk layer, and I will turn off the floodplain temporarily. But we've got a few other data sets. We have water surface elevations for all the different frequencies that we've studied. And you can see those. They're pretty much a smooth grid that you can see visually. I'll show you how we're using that here shortly. Now the 1% has full coverage of the watershed where we have 2D analysis. That is by design. The modeling approach we're using allows for that to be put out, but where it is underneath the ground information that you would get from this would show that it's the ground is higher, and of course we're not putting all of this in the floodplain. So just know that that is by design for the functionality of the website. And then we have the depth grids also available, and those are a little bit more interesting to look at. You get a little bit more definition in variation based on the ground and the water surface elevation difference. And then we have some probability grids. We have a percent annual chance probability grid. It shows you the probability of flooding in any given year. Go to an area where we've got some more building footprints. As I have to do. Yeah, so you can see the probability of flooding in any given year. We've got the symbology shown on the left. And then we also have a probability of flooding over a 30-year period, and this tends to give a higher probability return. And it also communicates better with your constituents, citizens who may have a 30-year mortgage. So knowing the probability of flooding over that mortgage period might encourage those homeowners to purchase flood insurance to better protect their investment. And then we have, turn this off, and I'll turn on the BLE to effective to BLE just for showing that. I'm going to go to an area with a little bit more happening. See if I've got a decent area. Here we go. Okay, so we've got the changes, change layer on where we can see the increases and decreases in the floodplain as proposed by the BLE analysis. We have all these building footprints. Well, so we have those symbolized by change as well. And so I'll turn that on. It's building risk change. And I'm going to turn on the imagery. And so you can see when a building has been added to the proposed BLE results or removed from the proposed BLE results. And so you can see that based on the symbology, the gray being no change essentially. And so you can see that with the building footprint points as well. So then the last widget that we have is the data download widget or extract data widget. And so with this, you can actually extract out the data results for use in your GIS systems. And so you've got a couple of options for how you can create a feature. You can draw a polygon, draw a square. So we'll do that. Say you didn't want the square, you can delete it. You can go with a circle, and you click in the center of where you want your data and draw you a circle. And you can choose between outputs that are in file geodatabases, a shapefile, or AutoCAD file types. So you've got a couple options there. And then you have check boxes for the different data sets that you want to extract and download. So you can choose the modeled streamline, the BLE 1% floodplain. You get the water surface elevation grid. You can get the depth grid, the probability grids, and so forth. And once you've kind of checked everything that you want, you hit this extract data button, and it'll give you a download for the data that you've requested. Let me just delete that real quick. All right, so now I want to show you the true reason behind these building footprints, why they're there. So I'm going to reset this back to the default state. And zoom back in. I'm going to try and find some buildings in the floodplain. All right. Okay, so there's another reason for these building footprints is not purely visual. So if you click on one, you get our reporting dashboard. And likewise, if you click anywhere in the floodplain, you'll get this reporting dashboard. But if you click on the point, it gives you information that's custom tailored to that building footprint for that property. And so it takes a little bit to get going, but here we go. So this is our reporting dashboard. And in it, you've got two map viewers. On the left, you have a map viewer showing the BLE results that we discussed, the 100-year and 500-year from the BLE. And on the right, you've got the changes showing the increase and decrease horizontally from the effective Zone A mapping. These are linked, so you can zoom in and out. If you zoom too close, unfortunately, the data disappears, so you just have to back out a step. That's just so we can make the site run smoothly for you. But yeah, if you pan around, move around, zoom, they stay synced and locked together. You've got the zoom buttons up in the upper left, and then you got a couple buttons on the lower right. You have a layer list, so maybe you don't want to see the change layer. You could turn that off, and maybe you just want to see the effective flood hazard information without the changes. You could do that as well. And then you can also change the base map. Maybe easier to see what's going on with imagery, and so you could change that as well. Now, sometimes we're using Esri's base map. Sometimes you get a message that when you zoom close enough to that the base map is not available. If that happens, there's actually just a wealth of base map layers, including a few imagery ones available through here. So just find a different base map layer, and that likely will fix the issue. So that's something to just kind of keep an eye out for. And then below the two map viewers, you have a legend box for just about all the different layers that you could have turned on in these two viewers. Little ways below that, you've got some summary information for highlighting the county that you're looking at, that the property is within, the effective firm panel, the watershed that the property is located in. You also get the estimated base flood elevation as pulled from our BLE analysis. You get the effective risk. In this case, the property was low, and that it's outside of the effective special flood hazard area. But then on our BLE, the risk is shown as high in that they are in the BLE 1% results. We also have the lowest adjacent grade, just kind of pulled directly from the LIDAR. Based on the building footprint. This does not have a buffer built in. That will make more sense a little bit later in the presentation when I get to a different part talking about the lags for structures and LIDAR. Below this, you have a couple table areas. The first is you get the depth for that structure for all the different frequencies that we've studied. And the second is the water surface elevation for all the frequencies that we've studied specific to that property. And then below that, you have the probability of flooding, and it tends to be that the percent annual chance is lower. And then over a 30-year period, once you compress the probability into that 30-year period, it tends to be a higher result. And again, that might communicate better to the homeowner and encouraging them to have flood insurance to protect their investment. All right. So going back up to the top, we've got a couple of tabs up here. We've got a Loma view, which I'm going to skip over because I'm going to come back to that, and that applies to the lag. And so hopefully it'll make sense when I come back to that later in the presentation. You can also see the effective risk by clicking here. It actually opens another tab for the property. This is the Georgia Flood Map Program's flood risk snapshot. This is our primary map viewer for all effective flood hazard information. So there's no BLE in this. That's all the effective flood hazard information across the entire state. And so you've got this map that you could print out and use as needed. You can go back to your tab for the BLE viewer. You also have a tab up here for the flood model search, Georgia's flood model search, where we have select models available for the effective flood hazard information across the state. We are kind of debating currently whether we want to include the BLE modeling in this. That's something that's been in discussion. But right now, there's quite a bit of the state where you have access to your effective modeling. Up until I think about a year ago, there was limited information in here. We went through an effort to dig up a lot of the models across the state where it was easily retrievable and code those to be linked. So in these dark green areas, we have the effective models available to some extent, and it's going to vary from county to county as to what extent in that county we have that modeling available for download. But it'll kind of coax you to what's available as you click on streamlines or select based on watershed, county, community, etc. All right, so also on the BLE summary tab, which we never really left here, you've got this report printing functionality. So you can print this report as either a portrait or a landscape. You take your pick and then you hit print. We'll wait for that to come up. We'll take a second, and it essentially gives you a PDF version of this entire report with a couple of additional add-ons to it. There we go. It just takes it a minute. So with it, you get the same sort of information. You get the first page is the BLE summary. So you get the summary of the mapping results from the BLE, your legend information, and then a summary of your data returns for that particular property that you clicked on from the BLE analysis, water surface elevation, depth, probability of flooding, and all that good stuff. The second page is that change viewer. You noted that I did change the floodplain to just show the effective, so that's what we're getting here. If you hadn't, you would still get that change information showing, and it would show you the horizontal increases and decreases in the flood hazard, and then a summary of the risk level as determined by the effective analysis versus the BLE. Below that, we have general disclaimers, and then we have a definition of key zones. All right, so with that, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and run through some more slides. And actually, from there, we've got our first poll question in the PowerPoint. And so the poll question is, base level engineering data can be used to replace Zone AE information on your effective flood insurance rate maps. And this is something that in the map viewer run through I alluded to. So to answer this, you would want to look in your chat box and then hit submit once you've typed in your answer.
Everyone, please be sure to use those radial buttons rather than typing in your answer in the chat.
Okay, we'll give that just a few seconds longer. Let's see. And then we'll move on from there.
And please remember, if you're going to get continuing education credits, you do need to answer the question.
All right, I think I see it slowing down, so we'll go ahead and move on. I think that'll remain open in the chat box, so you can always kind of scroll up to it. but I think we've got the majority of participants have responded, so we'll keep trucking. So now we'll talk about BLE and its uses in floodplain management. So to build off of that question, that first poll question, base level engineering is designed to be used in areas where you have Zone A information in your effective products, not Zone AE. The idea is to use it in those Zone A areas where you don't have BFEs readily available in your data, which should be the case for pretty much all of the areas where we're doing this BLE analysis, that you wouldn't have the BFEs in your effective firm database for those Zone A areas in the effective. Now you can also use it in areas where you don't have special flood hazard area identified or mapped yet in your effective products. And it can be used to support your permitting processes. So the NFIP sets the minimum standards for floodplain management and requires you to permit all development, review all development, and ensure that the development occurs in a reasonably safe manner compared to the flooding. And so that BLE information can be used to inform new building construction, substantial damage or substantial improvement renovation projects, repairs to substantially damaged buildings, purely from pulling the base flood elevation from the BLE analysis and using that to compare against those activities. And also, we do plan at some point to make the modeling available, and so that modeling could be available to test out different mitigation projects, inform those activities previously discussed. And you could say you wanted to test out different culvert replacement scenarios. You can plug in that information into the modeling and run those scenarios as well. The BLE data can help with informing any number of community assets and operations. Where your communities have electrical equipment or wellheads or other mechanical equipment in the floodplain, making sure that those assets are above the base flood elevation, the 1% flood elevation. Where you have sewer drainage systems going through the floodplain, making sure they're properly sealed, so you don't have unfortunate situations with sewage being spilled out. If you have fuel tanks, this is something I found interesting. Seems counterintuitive, but if you have fuel tanks in the floodplain, it'd be good to establish a plan to make sure that those are filled to capacity before any significant flooding events. The idea is to reduce the buoyancy of those tanks so that they don't float off and create worse situations downstream. The BLE data can be used to inform any number of better enforcement activities, looking for places where there might be opportunity to pursue an open space preservation project or just general land use planning, looking for places where we have excess flood hazard identified in the BLE analysis compared to your effective. It can be used. I didn't show the freeboard data set that we have in the dashboard, but that is available as well. That might help you see how palatable it is for your community to adopt freeboard requirements, requiring new development to occur an additional foot, 2 feet, 3 feet above the base flood elevation to better protect those structures in the long term. Plan unit development activities, rewarding your developers for avoiding the floodplain in its entirety. And then placement and access to critical facilities, making sure that the access points to critical facilities are not going to potentially be flooded, making sure that facilities that are in the floodplain are adequately protected, or if there's a potential to move or relocate those facilities, that you can kind of start planning for that. And when we're talking about better enforcement and going above and beyond the minimum NFIP standards, it's always good to kind of consider the community rating system. This is a program that's instituted by the NFIP to reward communities for going above and beyond their minimum requirements. As you do things above those minimum requirements, you essentially earn points, which translates to flood insurance premium reductions for your constituents. Currently, there's about 50 communities in Georgia, roughly, that are participating in CRS. So there's far more communities in Georgia. So there's lots of room for improvement there. And sometimes the activities that can get you points in CRS, or there's a lot of like really low-hanging fruit sort of activities to get you points in that CRS. Targeted outreach is one of them, looking at people who are otherwise at risk from flooding, outside of just being in the special flood hazard area. Looking where we have additional areas of flood hazard identified from the BLE, looking at areas that are in the 500-year floodplain. And a lot of places where we're doing this BLE analysis, the Zone A doesn't have a 500-year floodplain in the affected products. So looking at your population sets that are impacted by the 500-year floodplain results from BLE, and then looking at structures that are downstream of high-risk, high-hazard dams, seeing that if they're close to the floodplain, if you have an unfortunate dam breach scenario, it could be significantly worse than this floodplain is showing, and that they may want to consider flood insurance again. The BLE analysis can be used to support LOMA applications using the base flood elevation from our BLE analysis to inform the elevation certificates that can be submitted for LOMA. Now, if somebody is submitting a LOMA based on the BLE information, they would need to likely also submit a community letter of support for using that BFE source. But that's not an unusual occurrence. So this is a little bit different, but it builds off of, this isn't directly related to the BLE results, but it's tied to the broader picture and analysis. Is now that we have this statewide LIDAR, you can also use LIDAR to acquire lag elevations for properties. And there's two ways to do that. Traditionally, to get a lag for a structure for a LOMA application, you would need to get a surveyor. But for using LIDAR, there's two ways that you can use the LIDAR to get that. In both ways, there's essentially a buffer added to the lag just to be safe, because LIDAR data is very accurate, but it's not as accurate still as a traditional survey. And so there's a contour method and then a LIDAR point method. We're using this contour method on the website, and that's where I'm going to return briefly to that website and show you what we're doing. But for this contour method, we basically, FEMA will subtract half the contour interval, or 1 foot, whichever is greater, from the lowest contour closest to the building. And so on the map viewer, we're actually doing that calculation for you. We're using 2-foot contours based on that new LIDAR data. And so half of the contour interval would just be 1 foot. So we're subtracting 1 foot from our lag result. So I'm going to come on over here and show you how that works. And I'm going to go to Boston, Georgia, where I know that there's a property that fits this mold. So just south of there are a couple of buildings that are shown outside of the BLE floodplain. So we have them here. And if I turn on the effective SFHA, you'll see that it is actually well within the effective special flood hazard area, but outside our new base flood elevation. But you can also see the BLE has quite a bit more definition and detail in the floodplain than that effective analysis. So we're going to click on this building. That won't take too long for a reporting dialog to pop up. Where I'm going. Okay, so this is the LOMA tab that I mentioned earlier and said I would come back to. So what we're doing with this tab is we're giving you all the information to submit to get a LiDAR-based lag, essentially for supporting a LOMA. Now, this isn't going to work out as perfectly in every scenario, but some properties it will, and this is one of them that it could work out for, where we're showing the effective flood hazard information. We have the contours shown for the property, and then we've got summary information on the right, the date of the report, address, the coordinates of the home in question, and then we have the LiDAR-derived lag, and that has that buffer built into it. And what we can see is that ground elevation, the LiDAR-based lag for this structure is higher than the estimated BLE based flood elevation. So we're also pulling that into this report. And so this structure would qualify for a LiDAR-based lag LOMA submittal. We also have the date of the LiDAR, who it was collected by, what's the source, the vertical datum, links to the data where you can get quality reports. To use LiDAR for this, it has to meet QL3 or better standards. All of the recent 3DEP, USGS 3DEP program LiDAR meets that standard, and then some. QL2 is actually better than QL3. You have legend information below that, and then you have LOMA submittal instructions. And likewise on this, you can print a report, either portrait or landscape. It gives you all this good summary information, as well as some additional pages for it gives you a checklist for a LOMA submittal, and then some additional disclaimer and flood definition information. Come back to the PowerPoint. I'll try and keep trucking for the essence of time. So, so how does BLE factor into flood insurance rating? So the long story short is the BLE does not influence flood insurance. It is a side non-regulatory product that is out there. It can be used to support your floodplain management activities, but it can't influence the flood insurance rating. In fact, the firm panel itself doesn't really influence flood insurance rating very much itself. Now FEMA has revamped their flood insurance rating to be based on quite a few different factors now than it previously was. They still use the firm panel for the mandatory purchase requirement. If you have a federally backed mortgage and you're in that high-risk flood zone on the effective flood insurance rate map panels, then you would be required to have flood insurance. And that actually is the one way that BLE can influence your flood insurance, is through that mandatory purchase requirement by submitting a LOMA. If you qualify using the BLE information for a LOMA application and you get that approved, that removes you from the effective, you get a letter that informed that removes you from that effective special flood hazard area, and therefore would remove the mandatory purchase requirement for flood insurance. Now, it can also be used, BLE can also be used to, as I mentioned before, revise the effective regulatory products. And at that point, it would be used to, again, for the mandatory purchase requirement assessment for flood insurance. So when we talk about using the BLE data, it's good to make sure that your ordinances, your flood damage prevention ordinances are set up so that they can they allow you to use this base level engineering information. Georgia's current model ordinances do have language in them that allow you to use the BLE as essentially best available data. It has language in it that allows for other supporting data, standard engineering analysis, elevation data available to obtain, review, and reasonably utilize. You can see those model ordinances for comparison purposes if you need on georgiadfirm.com. You go to community officials and then flood regulations. It should be below that. And If you have any questions while you're comparing that and you're not sure if maybe your ordinance hasn't been updated in a long time, I encourage you to reach out to the Georgia DNR Floodplain Management Unit staff and ask them questions. They're very used to helping communities through updating their ordinances and answering questions. Very, very handy group to have access to. So this brings us to our last polling question, and we're just about at the end of the PowerPoint. So for this last polling question, it is, can base level engineering be used in support of letter of MAP amendment submissions, LOMA submissions? So yes or no. Once again, you should see polling in the chat box, and you want to use those radio buttons to submit your answer as opposed to typing it in. And you do need to answer this to get continuing education credits.
And for those of you who do not see the radio buttons, feel free to just type in your answer.
Just a little bit longer. I think we've got most everybody. If you're not seeing it, just kind of, or you should be able to, or if you haven't gotten to it, you should be able to scroll up in the chat box to it or answer as Jim has mentioned in the chat, and we'll try and log that as well. All right, so we'll keep moving, and so we'll kind of close on some resources and then allow for quick question and answer. So I've got a list of resource links and program resources. I'm Jarrett Matley, project manager with Dewberry, supporting the Floodplain Georgia Flood Map program. We've got our state contacts, Hayden Blaze, who's the state NFIP coordinator, Joe Martinenza, who manages a number of the ongoing project revisions across the state, and then Shannon Brewer, who is the program manager from the contractor side. Now we've got all these links for georgiadfront.com and the BLE homepage, and then a wide variety of useful links from FEMA and FloodSmart and so forth. With that, I'll go ahead and open it for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box.
Well, Jared, I do have one question, just to make sure that I understand. When you posted the map of Georgia with the BLE status, there were a lot of areas that weren't included, such as the Upper Flint watershed. Can communities that are in these areas have some other resource that can assist them in trying to determine the base flood elevation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Emily. So we do have quite a large area of the state that currently there's no BLE planned for, and there are places for communities to access base flood elevations in a lot of those communities. The first thing that I would encourage you to do is go to georgiadfront.com and look up the property in the address search that's right on the homepage of georgiadfront.com. So you type in your address, hit find, click on the return that closely matches your property, and if it doesn't go to the right place, you can pan around and click on the building footprint or floodplain, if you will. Now, in very select areas, we have started adding these building footprints where we've custom pulled and extracted the flood hazard information from the regulatory products, FEMA products, including some flood depths, base flood elevation, probability of flooding, zone type, and lowest adjacent grade. Doesn't have the buffer enforced in this. It's just a direct pull from the LIDAR that the analysis was based on, where it's available. And so you have that as an option. There's actually, so that's very limited. There's only a few areas, counties in the state that have that. Now, we do have much more broad coverage of the base flood elevation as a return, where you would click in the floodplain and you would get a base flood elevation. So we have that covering quite a bit more of the state than we used to. So I would encourage you to use that as your first stop, especially if all you need is the 1% water surface elevation. Come here, click on a building footprint if it's in the floodplain, or click on the floodplain and see if you get a BFE return. Now, there you also have access to the models, effective models that I mentioned, where it's available. And so from the Georgia DFIRM homepage, if you go to community officials, and then you go view flood data, you've got model search down here, and the first hyperlink under there, the flood model search is what you'd go to. And you would just want to either select by watershed, county, community, and then stream name, or you can zoom in to different areas and click on a streamline. Takes it a few minutes for it to populate, and it gives you a model. Now, if it doesn't give you a return down here, or you go to hit the download and it says it's not there, or errors out, basically it's not available. And at that point, you'd want to request the modeling from FEMA's engineering library. Like I said, we went through a recent effort to expand the availability of modeling that's available on this model download website. And then also, if you've been through a risk map project in the last 10 years, you probably have broader access to base flood elevations in your effective firm database. And so that's something to consider. So you'd want to go to the MAP Service Center, FEMA MAP Service Center. I typically do search all products. And then you'd search by, I tend to do the jurisdictional search. So find Georgia. We'll pick on, let's see, Rockdale County, and search for all jurisdictions. Rockdale being a county that has gone through, in the last 10 years, gone through a risk map revision. And you can download the effective NFHL county database. So this is the effective firm database. And we should have more broad coverage of cross sections for those Zone A areas where you can access the base flood elevation there.
Thank you so much, Jarrett. I do appreciate it. It's a very informative webinar. Charles Richards has got his hand up, and if we can take him off mic and let him ask his question. Meantime, if everyone else will type in whatever questions they might have in the chat along with their email address so that we can follow up with you. And please be sure to put your email and name in the chat if you're looking for continuing education credits right now. Also, mark September 7th for our next Lunch and Learn webinar. You'll be seeing some information on the next slide concerning both answering the, making note of the survey link, as well as the invitation and registration for the next Lunch and Learn. And with that, I'll let Charles ask his question if we can.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks. And I'll go ahead and put my name and email in the chat as well. So we are contemplating extending some of our stream studies beyond the Zone AE reaches. So I have kind of a two-part question. Is that something we could share with BLE, and does the state or FEMA have any kind of grants or cost sharing or matching funds we could leverage?
So the idea with BLE is to get it in the community's hands sooner rather than later. For a typical risk map project where we'd roll this data up into the effective products, that's a pretty lengthy workflow, average 4 or 5 year workflow. And before we initiate that, we are going to reach out to communities to talk to you about incorporating this data. And at that point in time, it'd be the perfect opportunity to let us know if you have additional flood hazard analysis. Maybe you have something that is more robust or that you're using locally that we may be able to look at and incorporate into the effective products then. So BLE currently, until it gets rolled up into the regulatory products, it's just best available information similar to the data that you have in-house. And so I would say, try and use that for your best judgment. As far as cost sharing, are you, can I ask which community you're with?
City of Marietta, Cobb County.
Okay, so currently there's not BLE planned for there that far north. Well, Marietta, so there won't be any BLE coverage for you as well. And
Okay.
we're aware that a lot of the Atlanta area communities tend to have additional resources in-house so like before we would do any future revision, we'd coordinate with you on trying to integrate that. As far as the cost sharing, I don't know, I think I saw Hayden online, or I don't know, Emily, if I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, yes. When he said cost sharing, now we do receive funding from FEMA to do the mapping project, but I'm not sure when he says cost sharing, is it that he was wondering whether FEMA would contribute to their own studies?
I'm sorry, I think my mic's still on. So yes, we're looking at any possible way that we could leverage, because as it stands now, we would be starting one stream basin at a time, possibly one a year out of general funds.
Yeah, I'm not aware that FEMA would contribute to something like that. Now it's a benefit, as Jared mentioned, that when the state does the mapping, then it would be an in-kind contribution as leverage when we fund the our risk map studies, but it's not cash. We would just say, okay, the community contributed X dollars in kind by providing data. But I'm not aware of any money that FEMA would make available for something like that.
Understood. Just thought I'd ask the question since I had you guys on the line. I'm going to go ahead and mute.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And Jared, if you'll take the map viewer down so everybody can see that last screen. This is also in the chat in case for those of you who've stuck around long enough. There is the registration link as well as the survey link. We'd appreciate you completing that survey. If you didn't capture the registration link for next Lunch and Learn, fear not, there is an email that has gone out for an invite. Please be sure to check your spam and or junk folders if you didn't receive it. And with that, that will conclude today's Lunch and Learn webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.